All right, guys, I am your host, Melissa, with the Face of Malpractice. Today, I will be interviewing Taylor Murphy to learn about her SSRI and gender dysphoria story and where she is today. Thank you, Taylor, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely. So why don't we kick things off with why don't you tell us where you were in your life before getting onto an SSRI and how did you end up on them?
Yeah, I was put on SSRIs around 12 years old because I had anxiety. And at the time, I guess I never questioned anything. I just kind of did what the adults, were telling me that this is what was looked at as right. And over the years, on top of, puberty's a difficult time for, I think, anyone. And on top of that, I just, over the years, developed this gender dysphoria, which I didn't really have a word for it at the time. I didn't really know what it was. I just always kind of felt like something's not right. I never really had a sense of self and began to just feel like I was in the wrong body. And it wasn't until, years later when, transgender started to become a thing, I was like, I feel like this fits the box I was looking for. And from there, it was just this whole confusing journey of self discovery and trying to find who I was.
Wow. Can I ask which SSRI were you on?
I was on fluoxetine, so I guess that's Prozac. Yeah.
Prozac, got it. And so while you were taking them, were there any other because it I can only imagine like there was you could have never associated that with the SSRI. Like was there any other indication something was wrong with with these meds, or was that primarily the symptom and you just had no idea it was associated to it?
Yeah. At the time, I never associated the two because it wasn't till I decided years later to come off of it that as I tapered off, the gender dysphoria just faded away and like completely gone. And
Wow.
that's when I was like, the big, like, wow.
Oh,
And then
wow.
I never associated anything with the medication. Like the reason I wanted to come off of it, besides just I wanted to see life without medication, being
Mm.
older, I also just always struggled with libido. So that was always an issue. And on top of that, I was also on hormonal birth control, which also was a double whammy for that. So I decided to
Mhm.
just come off of both and kind of be free from medication. And it was the best thing I've done.
Wow, and you're right, birth control, I mean, there's books on this now, right? Talk a lot about benzos, and, SSRIs and SRIs, but not so much gender dysphoria per se, so would you mind sharing, like, what does that mean to you? What like, in more detail, like, what were you experiencing? How did you feel not only about yourself, but others?
So at the time, I felt like I guess the best way you can describe it is you feel like you are in the wrong body. You wish you could
Mm,
change. Like I wanted to just completely be male, and it's hard. It's like that's you're not, and you feel like I at least felt like I was trapped. Like there was nothing I could do about it. I knew as much as I wanted to transition that deep down I didn't think that would actually help because I'd still be a woman and I know people have a bunch of different views on that, but that's kind of it was like the painful truth I saw in it is I was just stuck in this pain of wishing I could be one way, but being stuck in the reality that I didn't want.
yeah, for sure, and it
And I'm grateful that I never did anything medically. I never started testosterone or got top surgery. I wanted all those things and I never did it. And I think not having the full on support to say if that makes you happy, go do it. Because if I had had that, I worry that I would have went and did it and I would totally have regretted all of it.
yeah. And can I ask, did you experience suicidal ideation because of this?
No, I was never suicidal. It was just a very sad time. There's
Yeah.
nothing happy about just feeling like you're trapped in the wrong body. There's nothing happy about it at all.
And so can I ask, how did this affect your relationship with your parents, your siblings, if you had any, your friends?
Yeah, it never had really an effect on relationships with anybody. I'm very close to my family and my mom always tried to understand it. I would try to talk to her about it, but I also was embarrassed. I hated talking about it. So it was difficult for me to talk about. And she tried to understand it, but also knew she's
Mm.
like, that's not who you are. It's like she was very reasonable about it. And I think as frustrated as I was at the time hearing that and not hearing what I wanted to hear, I'm grateful for
Mm.
the way she went about it.
Yeah, for sure. It sounds like there was grace involved in that, and as you know, for so many of us, I mean, for many of us that are experience other, other types of different psych drug injuries, I mean, we're completely disabled and people don't believe us. Like we can't get out of bed and people don't believe us. So it's so difficult when you're induced by a drug that the doctor tells you is gonna do one thing, it's doing something else, the doctor doesn't believe you, your own family doesn't believe you, and it's like, where do you go? And it's like, I know your case is a bit different than, like, the typical, like, PSSD or benzo injury bind journey and all of that, but it's like our brains are so severely damaged to not have someone telling us, "It's not you, it's the drug, you will come out of this," it may take
Right.
time, like, not having that is in many ways what leads us, out the door, right? And so,
Right.
um I'm glad that you had that supportive system, or at least enough support to understand a bit what you were going through. Could Taylor, could you take us a little bit to now fast forward, you got off the drug and then at some point you started to, you start to feel things changing. Can you kind of talk to what that was like?
It was it was very kind of confusing at the time because in a way it felt like I was kind of losing. Here I am thinking I finally found who I was, even though I hated it. And it kind of went
Mm,
away. And so I was like, it almost
mm,
felt like I was becoming someone new. And that was very confusing. And I did feel a little happy about it, but like, it was just confusing. It's like, here I am almost losing the identity that I thought was, going to
mm,
make me happy. And I became way more feminine. And I feel like as time went on, I was like, I really did find the real me. Like looking back, I see myself as like a complete stranger. Like the fact of like
mm.
the things I thought, the way I dress, like it's so different now. Like I love the change and I'm very happy with it. And it's so weird to look back on. And it's like sad to look back on, but I finally found who I am and my happiness. And
Mhm.
I just try to bring awareness to, like what medication can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess if you could talk a bit about that. So it sounded like, okay, at some point you realized it was associated to the medicine. A, did you speak to a doctor and they validated it? Or B, was it the internet? Like, how did you come about that?
How did I like realize it was related to my medication?
Yeah, essentially. And then did you have any
Um,
medical support validating it?
I just kind of put two and two together on my own. It's like here I am. I'm on this medication. I feel transgender. I come off of it, and all of a sudden I don't anymore. And I've just
Mm.
grown to love being a woman. It was kind of just like I don't need a doctor to validate that because
Yeah.
they probably tell me something else. And
Hmm.
um, I actually, remember recently talking about this, and apparently way back when I was younger, when this started to become an issue, my therapist, I guess, you could say, or my psychiatrist said that there was no correlation, that my medicine, there's no way that this could cause gender dysphoria and these thoughts. And, I clearly proved that wrong. So I think talking to anybody in that field would probably not believe my story and come up with some other reasoning on why it happened.
Absolutely, and it's almost like a blessing in disguise, right? That you didn't continue pursuing the medical route because essentially what they would have done, right, in some form, polydrugged you, right? I feel like
Yeah.
that's the very right now. Unfortunately, that is considered the normal process at this point. Is that we're polydrugged, which then can only, you know, further neuroadaptation, further brain effects, further, I mean, there's actual structural change. We have evidence of the structural changes that are happening because of SSRIs, benzodiazepines, and SNRIs and antipsychotics. So it's like, it's so crazy. And you were clearly so young being put on this drug. It's like we are putting our children on mind altering drugs that affect the thinking, the feeling, the actual structure.
I for so many years I had this like detachment from myself, like
Mm.
being off. I look back and it's like there was like this numbness, haze, whatever you want to call it. Like I look at things so differently now, and my emotions are way different, and just everything about coming off medication is just like huge. It's such a huge difference, and to put a child on something that's going to alter their mind is very dangerous, and it'll affect every aspect of their life.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because it's like then the question then becomes, well, what do I do, right? As a parent, right, that has a child that's going through anxiety or depression or this and that. The question then becomes, well, if what you're saying is true and and what the doctor is saying is not true, then what do we do? And I think from my perspective, I think there's a few things, and I would love to hear your input if you have input on this. But it's like for me, like I would first look at the diet, remove sugar, go more of a
Mhm.
ketogenic diet or more of a carnivore diet, just to help, lower that oxidative stress in the brain and the inflammation in the body. And then I would go down the route of personally, because of I've gone down a spiritual journey, like I would be working with shamans and intuitives to help guide the child. But I'm curious in what is your input on that?
No, I agree. I feel if you put a child on medication so young, they're not going to learn how to regulate their emotions and anxieties on their own. And for me, now at 26 years old, I'm learning how to do it all over again by myself because I've been on medication basically like almost my whole life. So I'm relearning how to do it at an age where I
Wow.
shouldn't have to, but it's been rewarding. And like you said, I changed my diet. I went very animal based, and I noticed that
Mm.
just with my anxiety hugely. I feel great on it. And, just practices like, whether it's exercise that keeps you going, or, like just mindfulness, spirituality, whatever helps somebody
Yes.
is definitely a better route than just jumping to medication because it only masks it. It doesn't fix the root problem.
I love that you said that because it's such a, I think what you just mentioned is such an important thing to highlight. Because so the purpose of these drugs do not heal you, right? They emotionally blunt you. That's
Yeah.
actually the function. There's actually, these drugs do not heal depression, anxiety, any of that. It just emotionally blunts you. And there's a lot of other symptoms that come with it. But when you think about that, then how can you actually process the trauma? So I've done
Mhm.
a lot of trauma work, going through my personal journey, and and a lot of somatic healing. And what I've learned is like our body stores this trauma. It's like if how does that trauma come up, right? And in many ways, like what you said, right? Exercising is a good way to kind of execute that, right? To get that energy flowing. But it's like if we're taking a drug that suppresses our children, right, or adult or anyone, how will they ever develop the skills or actually get to process what is actually the root of this? And I don't see how that's possible when we're pushed on these drugs. I mean, look at you, you're 26 and now you're learning about emotional regulation. You're now learning of how to process, it sounds like. It's just such a wild story.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey, but I'm in a weird way, I'm glad to be talking about it, and I'm glad that,
Mhm.
all the years that I had all this pain, I can turn it into something really good and useful and hopefully help others with it.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think you're an example of someone taking their suffering and transmuting it because I'm sure you also, and it's very human to look back and say, hey, like I lost those years. You stole those years from me, doctors, right? Like that's a
Mhm.
very natural, organic thing to feel. And we have the right to feel it. And I think people like yourself go on and transmute that suffering to be of service to our community.
Yes, that's exactly. It's like you can't dwell on it and be angry. You have to put your energy into something positive.
And so I guess what advice would you have for someone, on an SSRI that's feeling, gender dysphoria, and or coming off and still feeling gender dysphoria?
It's advice can be hard, but I would just say to just really try to push through it. I know there's not one way to give advice because I know everybody's different. Um, and I would say try to do what's best for you, but at the same time, that's also hard advice because what I thought would have been right
Yeah.
was wrong. So it's advice can be a very difficult thing, but I would just say keep pushing through it because I for me it worked out in the end, and I
Mm.
think that's just the best thing you can do is you have to set your mind to something, and if you want to do it, you'll do it. Um, but I don't think that transitioning is the answer to anything, and I don't think that solves any of the pain. Um, for me, I think it would have made things worse. But it's just tricky. I can't really give a single
Yeah.
word of advice. Yeah, it sounds like an easy question, but it's really not that simple.
No, you're absolutely right, and I think you answered that beautifully. I guess, and then I'm also curious. Is I know there's the pssd.org. Do you know of any other resources, or do you think that's a great resource, or what
Yeah, I think
resources?
yeah, I think that's a great resource. There's a bunch on X. I don't have like the all the names on
Mm,
top of my head, but I know that's a great resource to if people are curious to look into that. That's a huge start. And I think that SSRIs are just this a huge issue that are just prescribed way too willingly. They're just handed out like candy, and all of the sexual dysfunction is just completely disregarded. And it's it's scary because it happens, and some of it's permanent, and no one can find help, and
mm.
they feel like they're just stuck, and nobody cares.
Yeah, and that's what's so heartbreaking. Again, it's like, okay, you develop these symptoms, which the doctors then deny, right? They're so uneducated, they deny it. It's still happening outside, despite, I think PSSD is mentioned on the drug insert in Europe and Canada, right? I think now there's that, I'm sure you know that mega lawsuit against the FDA of like, hey, why aren't you doing more to inform doctors? But it's like we have doctors that are denying it. And you know, we're stuck in these bodies. And so where do we go from there when there's so much unknown? I don't know. It's very challenging.
It really is because it's like you have a bunch of medications. Whether you want to, I guess a good comparison is you have like what I went through. You have people pushing gender affirming care, life saving care, whatever you want to call it, which it's not, but you have people pushing this on children, and some of them, regret it, and then they come out and they're like, I'm a detransitioner, and they try to share their story of the harms, and everybody just hates on them, and they're like, your story doesn't matter because there's others who it helps. It's the same thing with medication. If you take it and you're
Yeah.
not harmed by it, your story's heard. But if you take it and you're harmed by it, no one wants to hear the negatives. And it's just so frustrating.
But that's the crazy thing. It's not like this is a small percent of people. Like when it comes to sexual dysfunction, I mean, I've read multiple literature on this. And I mean, I've seen studies go up to 50 something percent, if not more.
Yeah.
Like this isn't a small subset of people. Like if in terms of how many people are on SSRIs or SNRIs, it's like 1 in 5. If that's the lower end of the spectrum, right? I've seen 1 in 3. So if 1 in 5 people
Yeah,
are on
they want
these
to claim
drugs,
it's rare so that it doesn't matter, but it's not as rare as people claim it to be.
correct, correct. So let me ask you, like, w- going through this journey, right? I'm someone that strongly believes that there are gifts that come out of our suffering. So I'm curious if you could share with us what are the gifts, if there's one, if you want to share two, you're welcome to share whatever, but what gifts came out of your suffering and your journey?
I think this journey just taught me how to love myself, and
Mm.
um because I spent so many years just hating who I was, and
Mm,
there's nothing happy about gender dysphoria. It's very painful, and it was hard to love myself. It was hard to look at my reflection and feel happy.
mm.
And now that I feel like I finally have this attachment, since I'm not so detached from myself, I have this connection with myself that I never had before, and I've learned to, love myself, and I've, it's just everything about what I've experienced after coming off medication has just been positive. I mean, it's a very hard journey to come off of medication. It's miserable. I mean, no one really talks about how hard withdrawal is when you're prescribed things, and it's very difficult, but it's nothing but rewarding at the end. And I've just had this hard but beautiful journey of finding who I was really all these years that was just hidden away because of medication.
Absolutely. And I think you're really, honestly, like having folks like yourself that have gone through the journey, that have made it to the other side. I mean, you're the beacon of hope we hold on to. And I hope you know that, and
Thank
why
you.
your story is so important, because there's actually not enough of you.
Well, thank you. It's just I mean, it means a lot to hear how many people like resonate with my story and want to hear it, because I made X just to kind of get news, and then eventually I was like, maybe I'll start sharing my experience, and I
Mm,
didn't expect so many people to resonate with it, and it means a lot to me that I can take my experience and help others with it. It's very rewarding.
yeah, indeed. Precisely. Like it is exactly that. And it becomes, it's interesting how things happen to put you on a certain path that would go on to help so many. And that's what you're doing. Like you just being who you are and posting on X, and speaking with me and doing any of the other podcasts. I mean, you never know the impact you're going to make, what one person makes. And
Right.
I want to highlight that to continue, because I think it's important, when you're of service, you often don't hear, you may not hear the thank yous or this and that. And it's like, I always just want to reiterate that for people speaking out, because the impact is so much greater than you can imagine. And it will only scale from there.
Right. Thank you. I mean, it means a lot to have the support and to just
Yeah.
have this like community of people that are in this together to really just get this whole message across that is just so ignored. And
Mm,
yeah, it's a lot, but it's rewarding, and I'm so happy to share my story, as hard as it can be, and it
mm,
gets, it's a lot to talk about because it's just there's so many emotions attached to what I went through, but it's
mm.
becoming something that in a way was very sad and painful to something that's becoming very beautiful and rewarding to share.
Absolutely. And I guess that would bring me to my final question, if there was anything else that you wanted to talk about today, or if we should highlight anything else.
Oh, I mean, there's so much to talk about, but I mean, that's like the main thing of just how medication affected me. I mean, I don't know if you have any other questions, but
I think you did a really great job covering. I think this is a really great overview of like how you ended up on where you ended up, and then your journey through, and your journey through the other side. And I think that's that's the piece people are going to be holding
mhm.
on. But yes, so Taylor, again, thank you so much for being with us today and being so vulnerable. Again, I know that can be challenging for so many, and I'm sure still challenging in ways for you, but you are truly saving people's lives by sharing. So if any of the followers wanted to find you on social media, where can they find you?
So I can be found on X at taymurph26, and there I just post my story, experiences, repost other things. It's yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And I'll also put it in the description, so people can find you directly. So it's easy
Thank
to
you.
find. Okay. Well, Taylor, thank you so much again.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Likewise.